Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. From the right, I'm Gary Polland.
And from the mostly left, I'm David Jones.
Tonight we welcome two guests, David, who probably know more about politics than you. Jim Granato, director of the Hobby Center for Public Policy and professor of political science at the University of Houston. And Mark Jones, who is Rice University's chair of political science and a fellow in political science at the Baker Institute. So welcome, gentlemen.
And he's also one of the Jones boys.
Allegedly a distant cousin to you, though I know he doesn't claim it.
And the other back story for these guys is they've known each other a while. In fact, Mr. Granato may still admit to having attended the man's wedding. Is that true?
Wow. I was there.
Yes, ma'am.
and you're still married. Right?
Not to each other.
Okay. That's true, and that's something you got to say these days, David, in the world.
Okay, so you're here at U of H, so we have to favor you, of course, with the first.
Of course.
Sorry, Mark, but
All right.
We'll take you over any time. Mr. Granato, you're interested in public finance, and you have a background in that, and financing the federal government seems to be what's on everyone's mind these days. Who's running for president or county judge, if there is such a position open in 2012. So why don't you tell us just how bad a shape we're in, such that this is getting all of the energy of the discussion in our politics these days?
Well, the economy, because the recovery's not been robust, there's a growing imbalance between percent the government takes in revenues and the percent they're spending. I mean, right now, I think nationally, the federal government's taking 24% of the GDP in spending, but it's only bringing in 14% of the revenue on the tax side. So you got a 10% gap there. And to address that, you got two choices. You can raise taxes or you can cut spending. That's all you can do.
Well, how about make the economy better? How about number three, grow the pie?
Yeah, and who's giving us some solutions about that, and with what immediate impact could they be giving
what makes
those solutions?
A problem right now is the consumer. There's been an enormous hit in our net worth and our wealth, which means we're not really willing to spend as much as we used to, and the expectation for future income is basically right now it's zero. So that means any type of income gain you get, whether it's through a tax cut, particularly people in the middle class and lower middle class, tax cuts for them are going to be saved. They're not going to be spent. So that means if you're trying to grow the economy through future changes in consumption, it's going to be very difficult. The avenue for growth has to come through business investment, and that's a whole other issue.
Also, you mean President Obama's solutions, Mr. Jones, about patent reform and treaties with countries south of here are not exactly what the doctor orders?
They're likely to have a positive impact, but not likely to solve the underlying problem.
And what would?
Well, I refer to my colleague here in terms of financial matters.
Well, you're a political guy.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the thing that we know puts people to work pretty quickly. I mean, after all, Obama had grants to states whenever he passed his stimulus bill. It kept a lot of people on payrolls. There were some shovel-ready positions that were filled.
Not much.
Probably not enough at the time. Who knows what he could have done if he'd abandoned rebates to people who probably just paid off credit cards. But what about those shovel-ready jobs and infrastructure jobs? And how soon do you think the Republicans are going to come around to letting that happen?
Well, I don't think that's going to happen at all as long as you have a Republican-controlled House. And even in a Democratic-controlled Senate, there are enough Democratic senators that are suspicious of those types of devices, as well as wary of the electoral impact were they to actually support them. So we're unlikely to see stimulus in the equation anytime in the near future, and because I think it's pretty likely that we're not going to see the House switch over to Democrat anytime in at least the next election cycle.
Dr. Jones, do you feel that maybe we ought to be looking at some other ways to maybe get this economy going again? Maybe we could reduce the regulatory burden instead of increasing it, with the EPA micromanaging and the National Labor Relations Board telling Boeing they can't open a plant in South Carolina. Why don't we have government just get out of the way? I mean, our air is a whole lot better than it used to be. Our water is a lot better than it used to be. But what the number one need in America today is jobs for people who want to work. So why don't we just do that?
Well, that certainly would be the position of President Perry. In a Perry presidency, that's one of the things that he's promising is sort of an option to the Obama model, that is lower regulation, lower taxes, and less involvement of the federal government in a variety of economic aspects, so letting market forces operate more on their own.
Dr. Granato, is it your take that the American people viewing the political scene really have lost their patience with both parties?
Oh, yes. I mean, it's very clear. If you look at the data on the right-wrong direction arrow, it's near historic highs right now. And people are very upset with the Tea Party, with the Democrats, and with the president.
I mean, it used to be the American people were pretty patient, and they'd be very forgiving. They'd give the leadership a break, give them a chance to get their act together. And of course, Obama ran almost, 3 years ago, and he was the next great answer because people were tired of Bush and Republicans, and so they wanted a new way in Washington. So now they have it, and now it looks like, actually, within 2 years, they were tired of the new way, and now they shift to another way. So are we going to have these shorter shift periods for politics in America till one political party or the other gets their act together and starts giving the American people what they want or what they need?
Or until a third party emerges, which,
Although those are very difficult. I mean, in the United States, given our system, we have something called Duverger's law, and basically the upshot is that with the type of system we have, you're looking at basically two dominant parties, nothing more.
Okay, so let's talk about presidential politics. That's what David cares about. Democrats, may have a little buyer's regret with Obama. They're thinking he's not as liberal as he should be. The Republicans are looking for I guess, the next Ronald Reagan, and I don't know that he's alive. But first, you, Dr. Jones, what are we looking at for presidential choices next year, and what should our choice be? What will our choice be?
Well, should in politics is a normative term. It's almost impossible to decide what we should get. Should we get Ronald Reagan? But Ronald Reagan's no longer alive. The options are really three right now. We have President Obama, we have Mitt Romney, and we have Rick Perry. Those are really the only three viable options for the presidency at the current date, and it's very unlikely that anybody is going to get in the race to really shake that up. So those are the three options to stick with. We have the Obama model of sort of continuing as we go, the Perry model, who wants to shake things up considerably, perhaps too much for many people, and perhaps Mitt Romney sort of somewhere in between.
And of course, we have Texas now as a model, right? Texas, with an economy the size of Russia, right? So what are the other, how else do we look like Russia to you guys? I see, we have the same size economy. We also have one-party state. We have crony capitalism, and we have starvation of the public sector with, people basically barely surviving while people at the top do really well. Are we approaching Russia, or what country of South America does it sound like to you?
Well, I think what you're talking about is the points that were Governor Perry to become the Republican candidate, the Obama campaign and his supporters are going to be hitting on. That is the dark side of the Texas model, which is growing levels and high levels of inequality, a large number of uninsured, a public education system which certainly is not of the same quality as you find in other states, that are sort of some of the consequences of a low tax, low regulation model.
Right. Low taxes means low wages and lower wealth. I mean, we're actually, we're only a rich state given the fact that there are so many here who are doing so well. That's where we get our wealth.
No, it's because we have natural resources, actually.
Oh, that's the other part of the Russian economy.
There's another side to this, too. I mean, we're business friendly here. I mean, it's amazing to me. I mean, people vote with their feet, and they're coming to the state in droves. And if you look at the state itself, there are 254 counties, and the dominant economic engine in this state is the Texas Triangle: Dallas, San Antonio, Houston, and put in Austin as well. But you've got, about 80% of the population there, and it's growing still. I mean, and people continue to come here, and with that, it's going to generate more demand and more jobs.
And Hispanic movement to this state, although some will argue that it's more a matter of just regular population growth rather than migration, should eventually change our politics, Mr. Jones. I mean, we keep waiting for that to happen. When do you think it will?
He keeps waiting, thinking it's going to be Democrat.
Yeah. Well, I think we're still probably 10 or 20 years off, in part because of the nature of the Hispanic population in Texas, which tends to be much younger, so under 18, as well as a large proportion who are not citizens, which doesn't mean that they're undocumented. It means, though, that they aren't eligible to vote. Combining that with low turnout rates leads to a Hispanic population that really doesn't hit at its own weight and politically. We're still probably 10 to 20 years away from the Hispanic population having the same type of impact that it has right now in California.
Oh, so there's time for your party to get their act together and start attracting Hispanics.
Well, and that's we have our this year's Marco Rubio running, Ted Cruz for the Senate. David, you've met him. Let's talk about that. Let's switch to that race. Texas U.S. Senate race.
Right.
U.S. Senate seats don't come open very often, and it's certainly not in Texas.
Right.
And I guess the first question would be, do the Democrats have a prayer?
No.
Okay, so that's out the window. Democrats don't matter. Doesn't care now. Okay, of the Republican field, you got Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst, you have Ted Cruz, you have Elizabeth Ames Jones, also could self-finance, Tom Leppert, former mayor of Dallas, and now you have someone new circling the race. What's your take on the whole thing?
Well, clearly. It's going to be decided in the Republican primary. Ricardo Sanchez is going to sort of perhaps be the standard bearer for the Democrats, but if you look at his campaign, he hasn't done anything, and now we're in 3 months in. He's unlikely to really be more than just a standard bearer, getting the same proportion of vote that, say, Rick Noriega got. In the Republican primary, I think Dewhurst is clearly the favorite, and Ted Cruz is nipping at its heels, trying to probably force things into a runoff. The real unknown here is, as you're mentioning, Michael McCaul. If he jumps in, given his vast fortune, he's the wealthiest member of Congress, he has access to unlimited funds through his Clear Channel familial connections, he could actually give Dewhurst a run for his money. We could see a much more chaotic field should he choose to enter the race.
And where's he from, Mr. McCall?
He's a member of the U.S. House. He represents going really Austin, but it stretches into the northwest Houston suburbs.
So there's the only Democrat that I have heard about is the former general,
right,
Rick Sanchez. Yet he has at least got the right last name. If he were to,
but so did Rick Noriega, and it didn't work out too well for him.
And Rick did work. I mean, he did campaign. I want to talk to you, Dr. Granato. Do you think the presidential race impacts a Senate primary? Because if we have a Republican primary in Texas that makes a difference with Perry on the ticket and still thought as a competitive Republican race, are we going to see extraordinary high turnout in the Republican primary where you get a lot of people voting? Could be Democrats because they got nothing to vote for. Sure. Could be people that never voted Republican before. Nobody knows who those voters are. They come in to vote. Where do they end up?
This is something I know very little about, so I'll let Mark answer that question.
Well, I'd say the higher turnout is, the more that favors people with Dewhurst, like Dewhurst and McCall, should he choose to enter, because they'll be up in the airwaves. They'll be saturating the TV market. Ted Cruz, who has a very strong base of support in the Tea Party movement, but it's likely to have less money, will sort of get drowned out. So the more that participation rises up, the more it's going to hurt Cruz. Though if Cruz can make it into the runoff, given that it's going to be 2 months later and it's going to be probably a very low turnout affair, he could be in good shape. But his first challenge would be to actually force a runoff and then also be in that runoff.
As Gary mentioned to both of you, the appeal that Barack Obama once had has greatly diminished. And in fact, his base seems to be losing some faith in him, as reflected in the Gallup poll that I just heard about. I mean, he's down to about 38%. So, does he not have a chance, though, to turn it around with this big debt deal in November with the Gang of 12? Now, I believe it is, Mr. Granato. And what do you think that debt deal could look like that would give him something to brag about in 2012?
Well, first of all, forget about the debt deal. Let's talk about the economy. Ronald Reagan, at his low point, he had a 38% popularity rating, and he turned it around. It's correlated very highly with changes in gross domestic product and a drop in unemployment. So the best thing that happened to Barack Obama is going to be the unemployment rate doesn't have to go down to 7% by next fall, but it has to start trending down, and he can then claim credit. My policies are finally taking hold, and argue that narrative all the way through. As far as specific policies are concerned, if he can move to the center, I mean, obviously some people...
Isn't that what a debt deal is? It's moving to the center. If he is the one his architecture of the debt deal that he can claim credit for, so I mean, they do anything. Doesn't he have to do something there?
Right. I mean, look at the elements in the Bowles-Simpson Commission report. I mean, certainly things on tax expenditures, link that with tax reform. That would be an issue that would resonate a lot with people that are independents and moderates. And so even though his base may be leaving him, I don't believe they're going to leave him. I mean, they may not turn out as much, but they're not going to vote for the Republicans. So the turnout may be depressed a little bit. But if he's adopting some of the things that Bowles and Simpson have put forth, particularly in tax expenditures and dropping rates, doing that trade-off, that's going to resonate very highly with a lot of folks.
Yes, but will he do it? That's the question.
Well,
he
he's
had an
got-
opportunity to embrace it when it came out, and instead he threw it away like a hot potato.
Well, his
Big
popularity
mistake.
was higher than him, right?
Yeah,
so
but
I
was
think he needs. I mean, the key thing is the economy, but in order for him to appear to be doing something, I think linking the Bowles and Simpson, at least some parts, and working with some Republicans could really drive this. Remember, his popularity spiked in December when he accepted the Bush tax cuts.
No, that's true.
And he put in some of the things he wanted, but when he went bipartisan, his popularity went up again. And then, of course, it spiked after bin Laden was killed. But the key one was when he moved to the center that time.
But what I also understand Mr. Granato to mean here is that the president has to be demonstrating that he's winning something. People want somebody to you want your president to not only lead but to lead and to successfully make your policies the law of the land. If to state it weakly perhaps, but so what else can he do given the fact we're not going to get stimulus? There's not going to be infrastructure, created. No Roosevelt, kind of solutions are likely to head his way. That means unemployment is, if he's lucky, it's going to be 8.5%. We're still in a recession, as some people say. They keep revising the numbers to where it looks like its contraction has been for the last 2 years or so. I mean, and there's no way of predicting that that's going to change. I mean, all he can do is go populist, but he doesn't seem to have that in him.
Well, he's in a very difficult situation, particularly in terms of Republican control of the House and sort of a stalemate in the Senate. It's very difficult for him to do anything legislatively. He probably needs to do a better job persuading and working with the Republicans, but I don't know if that's possible. That is, I don't know if there is a deal that could be made, some sort of consensus that could be reached, but he needs to be much more proactive in that matter. And a lot will just hinge on the issues of unemployment. If this time next year unemployment hasn't improved or gotten worse, or is sort of just gotten slightly better, the president's going to face this really strong uphill battle in the November election.
So really, this election in 2012 is going to be about Barack Obama. Despite all they want to do to make it about Romney or Perry, and that at the end of the day, probably not going to get him there, is it?
Perry has a chance of making it about him.
Well, but typically, in both of your experiences, the re-election of an incumbent president, that campaign is about a referendum on the president.
Right. Oh, yeah. On the president, and particularly now on his performance regarding the economy. And right now, public opinion regarding his management of the economy is relatively negative.
So as we stand here, as we talk about this today, the chances are pretty good that Rick Perry is the next president of the United States. Yes or no?
Well, I wouldn't say yes, but they're not bad. And that I'd probably say that he's a slight favorite in the Republican Party, and then everything else will hinge on the economy. If Barack Obama can help steer the economy and get things growing, he's in a very good position to beat Rick Perry, because in improving economic times, it's going to be really tough to convince the median voter in Ohio, the Northern Virginia suburbs, Iowa, the key swing areas of the country, to vote for Rick Perry. If, on the other hand, unemployment's bad, people are looking towards the future, thinking things are going to continue to get bad, then they're going to look for any option other than Barack Obama, so other than saying, Ron Paul or Michelle Bachmann.
So if you're advising
Republican,
so you're advising Rick Perry, your advice to him is going to be, don't make any big mistakes, and you get the nomination, and then if the economy doesn't improve, you're going to be president. I mean, that's basically it.
Mr. Granato's a policy guy, so why don't you tell us whether or not this Texas miracle is a fantasy or not that Rick Perry is running on?
Well, he inherited a lot of it. I mean, you could give credit to people like Bill Hobby, for example. I'm biased, I guess, but I mean, our center's named after him. But there is something about, the state of Texas in terms of the way the cost of doing business here and other things that allow for enterprises to germinate is very important here. I mean, even think about just even at a micro level. Think about Houston, the zoning we have here. Look at how we allow for, even though we have very little zoning here, and it's a bad word. The benefit of that, because you don't have very strong land use restrictions, is to allow for the housing stock to be very abundant and therefore relatively cheap. And so that's just one example of how we're constantly developing, creating things. There's an emphasis on economic freedom here that I see cutting across both Democrat and Republican lines here that I don't see in other states.
Isn't it easy to talk about economic freedom when the price of oil, which you have no control over, goes from 25 to 145 on your watch, which is what happened to Rick Perry? generating, maybe 300,000 or 400,000 jobs in the energy sector, which had nothing to do with, and which Barack Obama's regulatory schemes couldn't keep from happening.
Well, he tried, certainly, but he couldn't affect what happened
but
inside
not just
Texas.
Energy. I mean, obviously, the stereotype is that Texas is an energy driven by energy. Well, what about medicine? What about mining? What about all kinds of other? We have substantial growth in a very diverse economy. We're no longer just oil here anymore. Natural gas is another thing that seems to be coming online in a big way. We're going to benefit from that.
Dr. Jones, you see in the campaign Perry's rollout, and Perry, of course, is taking credit for a lot of things that happened in Texas, but do you really think politically it's smart to attack the state of Texas? I mean, David's giving you some of the talking points that Democrats use. To talk down Texas, Arnie Duncan was trashing our dropout rate. All this. Do you think that is going to be effective in taking down Perry's candidacy by going after all of us?
I think it'll be effective in some of the key battleground states in the north. And in fact, the Obama administration has to attack Texas in the sense that they have to cut down the Texas model. Who it's going to really hurt are Democrats here in Texas in competitive districts. There are fewer and fewer of them, but they're the ones who are going to have the D next to their name. So they're probably going to be most hurt by any sort of attack policies. But President Obama's campaign has no real choice, if Rick Perry's the candidate, to take down the Texas model and show sort of the negative side of the Texas model, and in doing so, you're going to impugn and stain Texas as well.
I'll trade a few state reps for that message.
One thing about this, though, if you pick any economic indicator and look at the trend line of Texas versus the United States, or Texas versus California, or Texas versus Louisiana, what you're going to see is we outperform most every state. I mean, on the economic issues. So if you're going to attack Texas for the economic might, that's the wrong way to go. That's like saying Babe Ruth struck out too much.
He did. That's legitimate.
Well, I mean, Texas did well. As we took multi-billions in stimulus spending in order to balance our budget and keep teachers on the payroll.
Yeah, the attacks are going to be on the social side. I don't think they're going to attack the economics as much. Maybe minimum wage jobs, that sort of whole line of attack. Where they're going to be attacking it is asking people in Columbus, Ohio, Cincinnati, do you want schools that look like the Texas schools? Or do you want a society with the levels of inequality of the Texas society? That's what they're going to be hammering on.
Sure. Minimum wage jobs. If you like minimum wage jobs, go to Texas. Because that's what we create.
Better minimum wage jobs than no job at all, David. One of the things we didn't talk about, switching back to the U.S. Senate race with the Perry, this is important. This is the kind of the decision-making process that you go through. Perry's running for president. As we move into the primary season, if it looks like Perry's going to be the nominee, then David Dewhurst, lieutenant governor, can ascend to the governorship if Perry quits or is elected president. So what does he do? That becomes a difficult decision. Basically, just sit back and you become governor, or you continue to spend a lot of money and do battle in probably all the way through a runoff for the U.S. Senate seat. That's a very interesting decision.
Well, he would only be governor for 2 years. I think now he's committed. He's jumped into the Senate race. Governor would then be the consolation prize for him, were he to lose. But I think right now he's going to be focused on winning the Senate seat, and then given, as you mentioned earlier, the propensity of Texans to reelect our senators, he's going to be essentially senator for life.
Or it could be governor for life, too, given our propensity for reelecting Republican governors. If you were David Dewhurst, you could be governor or senator. What would you want to do?
What a mean thing to say to a nice guy like me. I'm happy what I'm doing.
He knows. From working with Bill Hobby, he knows the lieutenant governor is the job.
I'd rather
to
be
take.
lieutenant governor, actually.
Okay.
So
that's a fair answer.
So tell us why it is that the opposition party in this country, which is the Democratic Party, hasn't yet seized the Warren Buffett mantle of, why aren't you taxing us plutocrats? Can anybody tell me why they're not seizing that?
Oh, boy. First of all, the amount of money you can get from those folks if you look at the analysis, the money's not there to pay off what he says we want to pay off. You can pay about 2% of the debt off when you tax people who make $10 million or more. And
but fairness matters. Fairness matters.
Sure. But let's even extend it further. Let's take the top 3% of the earners, 200,000 and above. Take all their money.
Above 200,000.
Above 200K. You know how much money you generate? $1.5 trillion. That will balance the budget. But next year, are you going to be able to get that money from those same folks?
No.
And think about the incentive effects of that. So that means that what you're going to have to do in the end is you're going to have a combination of very serious spending cuts. And you have to focus. The one place to focus on most of all is going to be Medicare. And that's going to be a very hard sell for the Republicans, because in order to do this, they're going to have to tell people the following thing. You're going to have to pay more for yourself. Now, on the tax side, work on the tax expenditure thing. We've got about $1.1 trillion in tax expenditures, that is the write-offs for mortgages and things of that sort. Mortgages, and there's one other line I can't think of right now, it's about $288 billion just for mortgage deduction.
Charity.
And is it state and local?
Could be
write-off?
state and local
But those
taxes.
two, you get about $300 billion if you were to eliminate that. But are people going to give up their mortgage interest deduction? But those are the kind of things you got to start talking
But
about.
they may give it up for lower rates.
For
that
lower
kind of
rates.
trade-off.
For
And more simplicity in the tax system.
And that's going to be the trade. Is the trade will be removing these deductions, which special interests are going to scream bloody murder about, but then also middle class are going to be upset about, versus getting a lower rate, maybe a 20% rate, maybe even possibly there's some Democrats I could believe in something called a flat rate, which would
We
be
can do
very
that, or
interesting.
the country goes broke, right? That's our choice.
And,
Yes.
and Mr. Jones, thank you for being here. All the way from Rice University. Mark Jones, Jim Granato, pleased to have had you as well, sir.
Thank you.
We invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org. Click on the local program bar, red, white, and blue. Read about our guests, watch the shows, a follow-up discussion, and until next time, get informed and get active.